So to the addict, the world is hostile, it's indifferent, in which he or she has to manipulate and find some way to soothe themselves, because there ain't no soothing in this world, there's no healing in this world. Those are some of the core beliefs at the heart of addiction. And that there's a deep emptiness here. Because as a spiritual teacher, and this leads me directly to speak about the ayahuasca experience, but as a spiritual teacher here in California said, the fundamental thing that happened, and the greatest calamity, is not that there was no love or support, speaking of childhood. The greater calamity, which was caused by that first calamity, is that you lost the connection to your essence. That is much more important than whether your mother or father loved you or not. In other words, the greatest loss that we endure is the loss of connection to ourselves. And that's then where we experience that deep emptiness that we're so afraid of. And that this culture is all about stuffing full of products, and stuffing full of relationships, and stuffing full of activities, and stuffing full of false meaning. But of course, the more we do that, the more addicted we become, because these things can never be truly satiating. So that emptiness can never be filled from the outside. The way through the emptiness is from the inside. Is from the inside. And that's where the spiritual experiences and the healing experiences empowered by ayahuasca come into it. Now, my book on addiction came out 4 years ago now, and I never heard about ayahuasca until after it was published. While I was writing it, I began to get emails and inquiries from people, what do you know about ayahuasca and the healing of addiction? I'd say nothing, I don't know anything about it. A week later, the same question. And this went on persistently for months. And I finally began to be both irritated and curious. And then it turned out that there was an opportunity to experience ayahuasca up in Vancouver. A Peruvian shaman was coming up and leading some ceremonies, and I did do a ceremony. And I sat there in the dark with my heart open and a feeling of delicious, nurturing warmth, with tears of joy rolling down my face. And I got love. And I also got how many ways in my life I had betrayed love and had turned my back on it, which is a coping pattern, because when you're vulnerable and hurt as a child, as I was, as a Jewish infant under German occupation in Hungary, then you close down to love because it's too painful to be open to it. And the ayahuasca got rid of my coping mechanisms in a flash, and that I was experiencing something. And I knew then that this is something to work with. And within half a year, I was working with people shamanically trained in the Peruvian Shipibo tradition, and beginning to lead retreats. So we've led a number now, and the results are increasingly but uniformly astonishing. So I'm going to read you some communications sent to me by people that have participated in our ayahuasca retreats, and then I'll talk about their experiences and why ayahuasca is so potentially helpful. Although, as the previous speaker said, nobody should ever say that it's a panacea. So this is Dr. Fiktevsky, who writes about ayahuasca. Responsible work with psychiatric herbal decoctions like ayahuasca, similar to many forms of meditation, has salutogenic potential. Salutogenic meaning health-giving potential, i.e. it can enhance physical, mental, and spiritual health by calling into play what is referred as participating consciousness. So if you can become conscious of your patterns and your beliefs, these core beliefs, and how you attain these beliefs, then you can let go of them. Rigid feeling, thought, and behavioral patterns can unclench. The self can rearrange itself and develop its inner and outer resources more deeply. So there we get to the concept of a true self, and one that can be reconfigured or at least rediscovered with the help of the psychoactive plants, particularly ayahuasca. So I'll read you now what some people have said about their experience at our retreats, and I'll talk to you more about the retreats and how they function. The last 2 nights have been challenging, but I'm getting good practice, negative thoughts as they come up. Under the effect, I can feel the physical sensation of fear in my gut as the thought arises and returns to a safer place. In other words, when you have a certain thought, like you have a negative thought pattern, when I say negative, I mean a self-defeating, self-deprecating, self-invalidating thought pattern. That's not just a thought up here. That immediately has a physical impact on the body. You feel it in the gut. You feel it in the heart. It affects your whole nervous system, your cardiovascular system, your immune system. And this person is getting in touch with how their thoughts actually are influencing their body. In the past, I've made many bad, irresponsible choices with hurtful consequences to myself and others. Despite knowing that right now I'm presented with new choices I can make from a place of love towards myself and the people in my life, it's hard to push despair aside. The despair that tells me I will continue to make the same poor choices over and over and again. That's the core belief showing up again, that there's something wrong with me. But this person at least is conscious of it. The other very powerful moment I had involved looking at the sense of being too much for my parents. I know no matter how much love this is a physician, by the way, who has nearly lost his license because of addictions, and his marriage is falling apart, and he came to the retreat. And he thought he had a perfect childhood, by the way. And I won't even go into the details. The other very powerful moment I had involved looking at the sense of being too much for my parents. I know no matter how much love they felt for me, they probably were overwhelmed with their own fears and anxiety. Well, yeah, the father had a near-fatal heart attack at age 28. I've experienced myself as when this child was a 1-year-old. I've experienced myself as too much for the world for a long time. I made a grand effort over the years to prove that true, which is why it cracks my heart open so wide to feel welcomed in the hearts of you and the people here, knowing that my feelings, my hurt, fear, sadness, and need for connection are not too much. I feel that the world can hold me, in fact, always has, and maybe I can learn to hold myself. It's painful to think that Miles, my son, may feel himself to be too much for me. I desperately don't want that to happen. Much love and gratitude. 5 minutes, I thought, an hour.
40 minutes.
40 minutes, oh my God. Okay, well I gotta make this quick then. I thought I had 60 minutes. Well, I'm gonna take a bit more than 5, but not as much as maybe I wanted to. I won't read you the other experiences, but they're all the same sort of people experiencing love, gratitude, connection to themselves, experiencing the childhood trauma. My daughter did ayahuasca retreat. She said that she revisited all the sad places in her childhood, and because I was a workaholic and very stressed and very undeveloped adult when I was a father to my young kids, she's had plenty of sorrow in her life, and she said that she revisited those sad places, but she did so with the loving consciousness and the empathy and the compassion of an adult. And if you look at the brain scans on ayahuasca, as done by Dr. Riba in Barcelona and other people, what you see is activation of the temporal lobe, where childhood memories are stored, of the limbic system, where our emotions are modulated and they live, and the front part of the brain, where insight is made available to us. And when you can connect the childhood experience, no matter how traumatic, and it sometimes comes up for people, some really deeply disturbing traumatic experiences come up for people during the ayahuasca experience. And those experiences may take the form of direct memory, direct recall of an image of what happened to them, such as a body invasion or other kinds of trauma. Or it may take the form of really scary images and creatures. But it's like a dream. In a dream, when somebody's chasing us, it's not because we're not afraid because somebody's chasing us. Somebody's chasing us because we're afraid. In other words, in during sleep, the childhood emotions, the centers in the brain where childhood emotions are stored, gets activated, and then the brain makes up a story to explain the emotion. And I believe that much is the same is true of many of the scary visions that people have during the ayahuasca experience. The beautiful images, of course, represent more the core self. So we get to see both what we've been running from. We get to see both the experiences in response to which we develop these coping mechanisms that then give us addiction or cancer or other form of illness. We also get to experience that core self and the beauty of the world as it actually is when we don't see it through a screen of suffering and misinterpretation induced by early experience. So we get to see both what we've been running from and trying to cope with and trying to manipulate. But we also get to see that true connection, that true love, that true beauty, that true vision, that pure insight, that pure strength, that pure compassion. And when we do that, we realize we don't have to cope anymore. We don't have to run anymore. We can just be right where we are. Now, that's not to say that because you have that experience, it's going to stay like that. That takes work. That takes practice. If you don't put in some practice afterwards, if we don't get follow-up, if you don't put into the context of your life, this experience just becomes a beautiful memory. But the impact of it will fade. So it's transformative, but it's only transformative if we allow it to be transformative, and if we work with it so that it becomes transformative. But if we do, it can be very, very powerful and certainly life-changing for many, many, many people. I have to say something here about context here. My work at these retreats, I don't lead ayahuasca ceremonies, I'm not an ayahuasquero, I don't chant, I just participate in the ceremonies. Leading the ceremonies are people who wouldn't call themselves shamans, but I would call them that because their work is that effective. They chant, and they work with people energetically. And they pick up on people's energies in the dark. I don't do that. I pick up people's energies in the light. I hear it in the tone of their voice, facial expression, choice of words. They sit there in the silence while they chant, and they're reading the energies of the people as they emanate from each individual in that circle, where there might be 30 of us in the Malacca. And then they chant to people specifically to unblock particular energies or particular energy blockages. Like with a person with cancer recently, 2 weeks after she signed up, she was diagnosed with breast cancer. I've told you my view of breast cancer, or cancer in general. It's the repression of anger, is one of the major dynamics in it. The shaman sits there in the dark and feels the blocked anger in that woman's breast, and then works with it to unblock that energy. So it's not just the chemical effect of the plant, and I'm sure other people have emphasized the same point. It's the context, it's the responsiveness and supportive interaction of the environment. And of course, remember what I said about when I was quoting from that Harvard article about how the brain develops in response to the mutual responsiveness of child and adult? In the same way, the healing benefit of something like ayahuasca is not simply the chemical effect of the plant, although that, of course, is inseparable from its other effects, but it's also the responsiveness of the environment in which people experience the ayahuasca. So the experience has to be in a safe context, in a context where there's guidance. Now, people sometimes have negative experiences, or they think they do, because they have an experience they didn't like. And so they resist the experience. And also the personality has a way of invalidating our essential self.